afternoon. It's nice to see you. I want to thank Red Cloud, Taylor's team, for putting this together and giving us an opportunity to introduce you to Paramount Gold Nevada. So I suspect a lot of people in this room may not have ever heard of Paramount Gold. There's probably a few reasons for that. The first is we're a little bit unique in that we're only listed on the New York American Stock Exchange, NYSE American. So we don't have a Canadian listing, though we do have a lot of Canadian shareholders, so we're also a reporting issuer in Canada. And in fact, this is actually Paramount 2. Our first company was called Paramount Gold and Silver, and that was sold to Core Mining back in 2015. And at that time, we spun out Paramount Gold Nevada, named such because we have the big sleeper property in Nevada. So fast forwarding to today, we actually have two main assets in our portfolio. We still have Sleeper, which has been slumbering a little bit in our portfolio until recently. But in 2016, we acquired the Grassy Mountain project in eastern Oregon, which we're going to spend a little bit of time on because you've probably never heard of any mining operations in Oregon, and that's simply because we will be the first asset to ever get permitted in the state. So we can talk probably more intelligently about that than anybody else can for permitting. So between these two assets, we have a total of 3.5 million ounces, so that accrues about 2.5 to Sleeper in Nevada and 1 million to the Grassy Mountain project in Oregon. The cash and prepaids here, this is a little dated. We do have a June year end, so we'll actually be reporting our Q1 either later today post-close or tomorrow morning, just to refresh you on that. I do like to give a shout out to some of my major shareholders in here. Seabridge Gold, we have very strong representation on our board. Rudy Franck is our chairman. He's also the founder and CEO of Seabridge, and they've been a tremendous supporter for a company our size. We're only a $15 million market cap company, so we have access to some tremendous talent within our board that helps support us. I do like to mention Ausenco as well, as they were the lead on our feasibility study, and at that time they elected to take stock instead of cash to complete the work. So coming out of 2 years of intense inflation, we actually have the benefit of a very fresh feasibility study that was just released this past September. And actually, this complies with new SEC rules called SK 1300, which you may not have heard about, and it might make your eyes glaze over, but the only thing you need to know is it's not exactly the same as 43101, so all of us US-listed companies have to comply with these new regulations. But essentially, it outlines, in spite of the fact that we have 1 million ounces in Oregon, it outlines a much smaller, high-grade underground mine. And the reason for that was really that for the very first mine to ever get permitted in a new jurisdiction, our team, when we took over this project, felt that permitting a small footprint underground mine was going to have a higher likelihood of success than a big open pit. That being said, there are a lot of ounces here that are not included in the current mine plan that I do think will make their way through, and I do believe that there are a number of opportunities that will see an extension to the current 8-year mine life. So when we look at the CapEx numbers of 136 million, this would compare to a study that we had done in 2020 on a 43101 basis, which was about 100, so you can see where the impacts of the inflationary environment are. We'll be producing about 50,000 ounces gold equivalent annually. It's a very simple CIL recovery process. And importantly, we'll be generating annual free cash flow after tax, in excess of our current market cap. So the other things I think I would point out here is that this 136 million CapEx, certainly as we advance towards detailed engineering, a guaranteed maximum price perhaps, and some reduction in the inflationary pressures that we've seen, I would see opportunities for that to come down further in the future. So these were the economics that we ran at. This is all post-tax. So we did run at a $1,750, which was the 3-year trailing price at the time that the study was completed, effective in June. All-in sustaining costs here are comfortably below 900, and we do have a lot of support down to a 1,200, call it, gold price for a break even. So it gives us a lot of comfort as we continue to move through the permitting process in Oregon before we have to make a construction decision. So the Grassy Mountain deposit has been known about for about 3 decades. It's traded hands a number of times. A number of previous operators have put quite a bit of capital into development, including Newmont had owned it for a period of time. All previous operators viewed this as an ideal open pit. And I think this image does a very good job of explaining why. The low-grade mineralization that you see in the blue is only about 50 meters from surface. And then the higher grade, which is in the hot pinks, that's actually the mine that we'll be building. That's only about 150 meters from surface. So what you're going to see here is there's a lot more definitely robust grade ounces that should make their way into an eventual actual mine plan once moving into production. There's certainly always an opportunity, if the social and political winds are there, to see this expand via an open pit down the road. And we also have a number of near mine and nearby mine exploration opportunities to see an extension of that mine life as well. So permitting, everybody's favorite topic in the mining industry, since we do spend a lot of time on it, but Oregon is unique on a number of fronts. I already mentioned that they haven't yet permitted a mine in the state. This isn't because the conventional wisdom would say it's Oregon, they're very left-leaning, environmentally focused, and they're anti-mining. That's actually not the case, not in the part of the state that we're in anyway. What it is that they have never actually had a project that was advanced enough to go through the permitting phase. So they've never turned anything down. They've just literally never had an opportunity to assess it. What we have going for us is we're located all the way on the eastern border with Idaho. So the terrain there is very similar to Nevada, sagebrush. We're literally in the desert with nothing around us, and we're in a part of the state which is desperate for economic stimulus and jobs. The unemployment rates are high, the poverty levels are high, jobs are scarce, and so that has led to a lot of support at the county, community, state level to see this project move forward. The other thing that makes Oregon unique is it is a pay-to-play state, and I want to be upfront about that, which that means that we have to reimburse the agencies for the work that they incur while assessing our permits. And that's really why over the last 6 years since acquiring Grassy, advancing it through multiple economic studies, and undertaking the permitting, we really haven't had the capital bandwidth, I would say, to focus more on sleeper in Nevada than we're starting to have now. The other being, frankly, when we first spun out after the acquisition by Core, in a $1,250 gold price environment like we were in 2015, Sleeper, which is a very large property but low grade, wasn't economic. It's certainly starting to look better these days, but this is why Grassy has been our focus. And so the way the permitting works in Oregon is it's also time-based. For most of the parts of the process, the agencies, the permitting agencies, have specific time frames that they have to respond to our submissions in. And we are well into this now. I would say in the 2.5 years now that I've been with the company, we have better visibility on a near-term permitting catalyst than we've ever had. So essentially what happens is when you make your first application, as we did in November of 2019, the agencies at that time, they have a very short 90-day period to respond with their comments, which they did, but that brought us to, call it late February 2020. We all know what happened after that. The world basically hit the pause button. And for us at Paramount, it was a good opportunity to retrench, complete our feasibility study, and figure out how we were going to respond for our next submission. Hiring in an incremental permitting consultant named SLR, we're US-based, are excellent. And with them, we submitted our updated application to the state in December of 2021. Now we're in a period that's called a completeness review, where essentially all the agencies in Oregon have to evaluate our permit to ensure that they have all the information they're going to need when it comes time for them to start writing the draft permits and completing the environmental assessment. And this is really designed to protect us as the applicant for not being rejected because we're missing something of an administrative nature. But it does mean that we are in the one period where there isn't a fixed timeline for a response, though the indications from our recent discussions and meetings with these agencies, including public meetings, which they are mandated to hold, is that we should see this catalyst come through in early Q1, where they'll be issuing something called the notice to proceed. And that's what starts a 225-day clock for which they have to complete the drafting of the permits. So there is something that's right around the corner from that standpoint. What you'll see from us ahead of that, though, is that we have made an updated plan of operations submission to the BLM, and that was submitted last month. That was the culmination of a number of in-person meetings to address their comments as well. And coming out of that, We made this updated submission. The BLM, again, by a legislative standard, has 30 days to respond, so we should be hearing from them hopefully sometime this month. So since we acquired Grassy for $10 per ounce in the ground, we've actually moved it through a number of different successive de-risking events. We've had a number of permitting wins, even in the state of Oregon, which, kind of get lost in the shuffle because they're not the big one, I'll say, which is, the acceptance of this consolidated permit application, but they're all important steps towards getting this permitted. I had mentioned earlier that we have opportunities both near mine and within the mine to extend the mine life of Grassy. We also have a property called Frost, which we've optioned from Ely Gold, now Gold Royalty. This was a property that we were attracted to because the entire area are these volcanic centers. So this shares similar geophysical signatures and whatnot as what we see at Grassy. It had been drilled in the early 90s by Western Mining. They had hit intercepts up to 25 grams a ton. So although Grassy in itself is pretty high at close to 7 grams underground, if we can find more 25 gram material or even 10 or 15, it would certainly do wonders to help extend the mine life. This is about 12 miles away, so we would envision it being a satellite that we would truck to a common processing site at Grassy. So as I mentioned at the outset, we also have a significant property in Nevada called Sleeper. So Sleeper has a very storied history. Back in its day, they produced close to 2 million ounces at 7 grams per ton from an open pit heap leach. What we have today is not 7 gram per ton material, otherwise we would not be permitting anything in Oregon. But we do have a lot of ounces here. There's a historic resource that was in excess of 4 million ounces. And we're in the process now of actually updating that historic resource. Again, we need to bring everything back into the new SEC requirements for US listed companies. And so what we put out in time for our 10K filing that just happened last month was an initial resource. So we've only gotten to the point where we could outline 2.4 million inferred. However, I'd look at this as more just a starting point as we complete this conversion, because interestingly, when you work with a property that had so much history on it, nothing was digitized, or certainly not enough of it. So as MDA, Respect, who's building the resource for us, encountered, there were a number of things that required some reassaying, rechecking, and basically building out the quality of the database. So we're quite pleased that this work is going on, because we're going to have something very robust coming out of it, which will help to paint the path forward of what our next moves will be with Sleeper. So if I could just orient your eye to historic drilling here, as I mentioned, there's a lot of data. I mean, the initial resource was built using over 4,000 drill holes, so that's a lot of rechecking that needs to be done. But our land position is quite substantial. We've got about 40,000 acres here, and all the historic drilling really centered around the old pit, which makes sense when they had that kind of grade. But it does also suggest that there's a lot of opportunities here for additional exploration, which really nothing here has been done in about a decade. The other part of that puzzle is that we do have a sulfide component of the deposit. The initial PEA that had been done on us back in 2015 had contemplated only the oxide and mixed material, and you'll see something similar down the road when we get to that stage. However, there is an opportunity to look at how you could process sulfides as well, which is something that we did test in 2015 using bio-oxidization. We also ran some similar tests using ambient alkaline oxidization in 2021. Yielding very similar type recoveries, which could also paint a different eventual production scenario at Sleeper. And then the last small piece of our asset story is just a property that we optioned last year called Bald Peak. This is in Mineral County, Nevada, also from our friends at Ely. What attracted the geologists to this is that it sits on a parallel structure to some past producing open pit mines that were quite prolific in their day. It had some very high grade surface samples. It had an existing plan of operations with the US Forest Service, but it had never been drilled. What attracted me to it was only $20,000 to exercise the option, with a very low total cost when we exercise the entire option down the road based on certain catalysts. So what we did is we shot geophysics on this right away, and we took some surface samples. Of the 44 that we took, every single one of them encountered gold. We do have a number of drill-ready targets, and we are currently waiting for the drill permits, which, although they will likely come in the next few weeks, we will look to drill this likely next fall. We're having a somewhat of an exemption or an extension on the permit that had been initially granted. It gives us a year from first disturbance. So our rationale here is if we start next fall, we can get in probably 2 months of drilling, inform a future drill program, which we could then undertake the following year and have a better basis to work from about what we have at Bald Peak. So what I'll leave you with is, although I only joined the company 2.5 years ago, I am blessed with a very experienced management team who's been here for over a decade. My board as well has very strong support, as I mentioned, from the Seabridge camp and across the disciplines that are helpful to us. And I will leave it at this. We are a $15 million market cap. We're trading at very low dollars per ounce in the ground right now. We have endeavored to keep the share count low, so we only have 47 million shares outstanding, and we do have a very supportive shareholder base as well.